Hello, my name is Kylie Eamon, and I'm the creator of Geology in Browns Park lesson plan for the John Jarvie Historical Ranch Curriculum Project. To get started, the intended learning outcome of this project is to get students to see geology as part of a dynamic system in which they as humans interact with. The first part of this is just some general background about the geology of Browns Park. This includes just that it's mostly sedimentary rocks and just how that ties into Utah's geology in general. This is not part of the lesson plan in general and is more for educators to know for themselves so that they can have a broader context on what they are teaching, and also to give them more of a broader understanding so they can answer their students' questions as they arise. The first activity in this lesson plan is to teach your students what a rock and what a mineral is and what the difference is in between these two objects. This might seem really obvious at first, but once you really start thinking about it, there are a lot of things that this is just something that you learn over time to identify what the difference between a rock and a mineral is. So here we have our sheet that is a rock, and this is a mineral. These are located at the end of the lesson plan with the rest of the teaching resources for this project. You can print these out or put them on a PowerPoint screen. It's up to you, whichever works for you. After you have worked through explaining to your students what a rock is and how that compares to a mineral, you can also you can hand out our compare and contrast worksheet that we have in this, and here it is. You want your students to go through and check off, is this a rock? Is this a mineral? Is this a rock? Is this a mineral? And we have the, oh goodness. And we have the exact answer key right afterwards. Your students can work individually or in groups. I personally enjoy having students work in groups. I think you get a lot more of a cohesive work environment. I think it's more reflective on what actual science is like. And I think it's more fun for students to work together to solve problems like this. The next part of this is to work through learning what the rock cycle is. I have created an example of the rock cycle here in this document. These are really easy to find on the internet, and you probably also have one in your classroom or in your teaching resources, but you are more than welcome to use this to explain to your students what the rock cycle is, how rocks change over time, or you can Google a video or another document online. There's plenty of these out there after a simple Google search. After you've worked through teaching your students what the igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rocks are and what their characteristics are, you can encourage your students to draw the rock cycle. Again, you can have this picture up as an example or any picture that they can see on the internet, or they can make their own based on what they learned. I would again recommend working in pairs. I think it's a really fun way for students to correct each other and to work as a group and to have that group think to solve problems. After you've done these projects, we have a rock cycle of musical chairs. It works fairly simple like most musical chairs. The only difference is you are going to be separating students into groups of 3. One group is igneous, one group is sedimentary, one group is metamorphic. So every student is assigned to one of these 3 groups. You start off like normal musical chairs. Everyone is sitting in a chair. When you start, you're going to want to read one of these. So if you read, this is the kind of rock you are most likely to find fossils in. Every student who has sedimentary as their rock stands up, take away one chair, have student play some music or whatever you would like, have students rush to different chairs. The student who is not sitting is out, and it continues for the rest of the cycle. Repeat reading these questions from the categories at random until you have 2 or 3 children left, and then you can play normal musical chairs at that point because it's a little bit silly. You can also use these questions to see who can answer the most questions about these rocks. There's also general questions, so if someone says this kind of rock will change over time, all students should stand up. If a student stands up on if a student stands up on the wrong one, so for instance, someone says this kind of rock comes from the word that means to change in form, or if a and they were labeled as an igneous rock, that student would be out. Or if someone said, because this kind of rock is formed from magma, there are no fossils in it, and someone who had a sedimentary rock stood up, they would be out. It's just another layer to the game. The second part of this is to work on the geology of Browns Park. You're going to have your students get together in groups of 2 and 3, and you're going to be making some observations based on rock formations found near Jarvie Ranch. So let's see. We have these sheets at the end of the page. Oh, goodness. At the end of the lesson plan. There are a bunch. I took all of these photos when you go out there. If you do get a chance to go out to Jarvie Ranch, you can also have your students explore these formations on their own. And you want students to be making observations of these rock formations. Once students make these observations, you can also give a little bit about the context of the John Jarvie Ranch area itself. This is some more background information for you to teach as you go along. Once your students have answered the questions of the local, have made their observations, you can hand out this local geology worksheet, and you can either have your students in groups fill out these characteristics based on rocks that they find in their neighborhood. So you can go out to a park as a class or to your playground and make these observations. You can buy your own rocks. Rocks are relatively cheap to buy, so you could buy a little piece of metamorphic rock, granite, or you can go find your own and have these in your classroom. Or you can continue to use the pictures that you use to fill out this worksheet, which includes what are 3 characteristics you noticed, what kind of rock do you think yours is, and then based on your observation, what can you infer about the environment that your rock came from. So here's a little bit of an answer sheet if you want an example of what a finished worksheet would look like in this case. For the last portion of this activity, you're going to want to encourage students to start thinking about the ways that humans interact with geology. We tend to have an idea that geology and rocks are, since they are not alive, they are not that important to our environment, but they make up the very bones of our environment. And the ways that people survive in their environment also is very often very tied to the geology of it. So here we have a bunch more information that kind of shows how the geology formed the history of Browns Park. And then after, if you want to share that, you can, but for this activity, you're going to want to ask students to bring in small boxes like shoe boxes from their house, or to bring in any that you have. You can also do this in little plastic containers. What you want to do is fill the boxes, these little containers, and this can also work like those little sandwich box containers. You want to fill it with dirt, sand, and gravel before your students arrive in the classroom, and place marbles in that dirt, sand, and gravel. These marbles will stand in for precious minerals. Make sure that they're completely covered. Once you've completely covered those, the marbles, you want to put on top little plastic trees, little animals, anything to kind of give it like a sense that it's a little environment. So you're kind of making a little diorama. Once your students arrive, ask your students to get into group of 2 and 3, and these groups are going to be your minors. You're going to assign students to different boxes to make their claim, as you would as a minor. John Jarvie was a minor occasionally, and this is also tying back to that history of the area. You want your students to take their turn digging in that claim. Ask your students to place that nearby the material in a nearby bowl, or just try to contain that mess because it will get a little bit messy. You want your students to write down what they find, what kind of marble did they find, how much would this be worth, is this a valuable thing? Try to mix and match how many marbles are in each. Some of these containers should have like 10 marbles, some should have 2, just to reflect the way that minerals are not distributed equally throughout nature. And so just to kind of have that claim, just kind of vary how many marbles go in each. After each of your students have shared what they found during digging, I want you to ask your students, what does that little diorama look like now? Where are those little trees, plastic animals, and buildings that were on top when they started? This is to get students to start thinking about the ways that mining impacts the environment. So you want your students to think about the trees, animals that they had to uproot to get to those minerals, and how does that reflect on our actual lived practices of mining today? Um, Now, once your students finish mining and you've talked about the ways that mining impacts the environment, ask your students to restore the landscape to what they had before. This is a common practice in mining today. A lot of students, a lot of places practice mine reclamation, and it actually works to restore environments in real life. So this is tying to actual practices that people do in real mining operations. For the Jarvie Ranch extension, you're going to want to do that local geology worksheet, but you would just do it at Jarvie Ranch instead of doing it in your local backyard. So you would just take this to the site and fill that out while you are there. Again, at the end of this lesson assessment, you're going to want to get your students to sit in a circle and talk in a group to talk about what they learned from these activities, what their favorite part was, what their least favorite part was, what do they wish they had learned. This is just so you can get an answer of what students got out of this information, so you can make improvements in the future. For students who are less inclined to do those group discussions, you can also have them write down their answers if they don't want to. We have some other resources at the end involving rock cycles, mine reclamation, and the rock cycle explanation from the National Geographic. And then again, we have all our wonderful resources at the end of the page, so you don't have to go out and search for any, although you are more than welcome to go and find any kind of materials that you would like to use in